right, we are rolling.
Okay. Nick, give me your name for the record here.
I'm Nick Shrauger.
Can you spell your last name?
Shrauger.
Okay. And can you tell me your relation to B.F. Christenot? Start out with saying B.F. was my...
B.F. Christenot, Benjamin Franklin Christenot, was my great-great-grandfather's brother. So I think that's make him my great-great-uncle.
And so he comes out to Montana in 1863 to Alder Gulch. Why don't we just start out with his arrival here in Montana and where he was from originally.
Benjamin Christenot and his family originally originated in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, and then moved into the Illinois area. And from there, we don't know much about Benjamin. We do know he tried to go in the Civil War but didn't make it. And then our next we hear of him is when he's in Alder Gulch and somewhere in 1863. He certainly had claims filed in 1864. Don't know how or why he got into mining or how he reached that point, but that's when we first know him here in Montana.
So he was there at the very beginnings of the discovery of gold at Alder Gulch.
Certainly early on, I don't know at the very, very beginning, but he's certainly one of the early miners there.
And he started doing, I would assume, some placer mining himself, and then it kind of snowballed from there. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Benjamin, as near as we can tell, was a good miner because he bought and sold many different claims on many different discoveries in and around Summit, and then later up in the Ora Cache above Union City. And he certainly had those placer claims and was from those able to buy the hotel and at Summit itself, and then later sell it. So he seems to have been a successful miner and made some money and was able to acquire a great number of mining properties. And I think he actually worked those properties himself, certainly in the early years for sure.
Nick, can I have you take out that pen in your pocket?
Yep.
So he's out there, and I wonder if you can kind of talk about the kind of transition that happened from placer mining to lode mining up there.
In my understanding that, of course, the early mine was a placer mine. That was an early discovery. But water is imperative for finding gold in that manner. In the wintertime, water forms into ice, and these miners have time on their hands, and so obviously they know that there's gold here, and they start looking for hard rock mining or quartz mining things. Just how that evolved, I'm not sure, but eventually a lot of lode claims were filed, and a lot of gold properties began where they were digging in the mountain, digging in the dirt for quartz and for hard rock gold.
And so Christenot starts buying up some of these properties, and seems to have found some fairly rich ore-bearing areas.
Yes.
Can you start with all that?
Yeah. Benjamin Christenot obviously was able to buy or sell or obtain some of the richer properties in various places up and down the gulch. The details are unknown to us exactly, but certainly made enough money at it to attract the attention of investors.
And so he does in fact do that. He takes some gold with him and goes back to Philadelphia to attract some investors to these claims out in Alder Gulch. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, Benjamin Christenot is alleged to have secreted gold on his body in Rhode Ancient times and taken it back to Philadelphia, where he found investors to invest in these properties. He had 87 mining. He and his wife had 87 mining properties at that time. But the truth of it is that a company called Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company had been formed in Pennsylvania, and those investors were aware of these properties in Montana, and that Christenot was the face of these properties and probably took samples back, but samples were sent earlier and assayed, and these investors saw an opportunity, they thought, to make good money in Montana mining. And several other investors from other states did the same thing. This group happened to be from Pennsylvania, mostly Chambersburg, Pennsylvania people.
Okay, so he goes back with these samples, and they had previously been assayed. So what's his pitch? That we need stake money for more equipment.
Well, yeah, they had, obviously, if you go hard rock mining, you need to crush the gold. And there had been some gold crushing activities in the gulch. There were primitive gold crushing things like arastras, and he operated one on the Ora Cache. But to really get the volume of rock crushed to get the money that they thought they could get, they needed machinery to do that. And so he sold these mining properties to Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company, and was that with the money they raised by selling bonds, they were able to obtain the machinery and send it back to Union City and Alder Gulch to try to crush gold and make fortunes.
Okay, so let's get into that a little bit. So this machinery that we're talking about are these Chilean rollers, and I believe we were talking yesterday, you told me that they were probably manufactured in the Philadelphia area. Can we talk about the genesis of that a little bit, and then we'll get into shipping it out and then talking about transporting it over the trail?
Okay. The crushing machinery that was used in Alder Gulch, as I say, started with the arastras in a more primitive way. Eventually, stamp mills, which are vertical weights that are lifted on cams and dropped onto the ore to crush it and grind it, were the common mechanical way of doing that and powering it. But in the case of the Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company, they decided to purchase machinery in Philadelphia from a company called Morgan and Orr and Company, which made mining machinery for South America. And the kind of machinery they got, the generic term would be Chilean rollers. And these were two heavy wheels connected to a vertical shaft, and these wheels roll in a pan, think of a saucer, a 4-foot wide saucer, and as these wheels were spun around or moved around that pan, they both ground and crushed the ore into fines. Mercury put with it, and water and so on, amalgam produced, and then the gold saved and retorted. And it's unknown why they used Chilean rollers, but it is the first example we can find of Chilean rollers in the 1860s in Alder Gulch.
Okay, so this consortium then buys this machinery, has this machinery made, and they ship it to Nebraska City. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes, the machinery was manufactured in a foundry in a company, Morgan Orr, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But we know that it was shipped on the steamer Nile from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay, let's back up and say we know that it was shipped on the steamer Nile from Pittsburgh.
And we know this machinery was shipped on the steamer Nile from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we assume the machinery went from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh by rail. The machinery goes on the boat goes down the rivers, finally coming back up the Missouri River to Nebraska City, where it was unloaded and put on a wagon train bound for Alder Gulch, Union City in Montana.
And so who was heading up this wagon train?
The wagon train was managed by a man by the name of Thomas Cree, and he was a Civil War veteran, and not quite sure how they selected him, but he was the manager of these 52 wagons that made up this ox train, this wagon train. On that train also was a member, Jeremiah Cook, who had been living in Virginia City, who was one of the investors in the mining company, Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company. And Jeremiah accompanied the wagons, the machinery on that trip.
And so there's, I think we said that there was 52 wagons, but this was divided in half, and half of it carried the machinery, and the other half, I assume, were supplies and passengers. Let's talk a little bit about that.
The wagon train itself consisted of two wings, they called it, of 26 wagons each, each having its sort of own wagon master. I'm not sure which of these 52 wagons, I'm sure that all had machinery, but there were 10 wagons of the 52. 5 were provisions for the wagon trains, and 5 were equipment or provisions or household goods. I don't know, for Benjamin Christenot. He was fairly wealthy at the time because he had sold these properties, and he brought back 5 wagon loads of stuff.
And so the weight that they were hauling.
The record shows that the mining machinery weighed approximately 80 tons. So if you subtract off the 10 wagons, that leaves approximately 40 wagons to carry the machinery. So it's about 2 ton or 4,000 pounds per wagon on each of the 52 or of the 40.
So they go up the Oregon Trail and hit the Bozeman Trail, and it must have been a monumental effort carrying this incredibly heavy machinery in these wagons over these rough roads.
Yeah, it was. They went on the Overland Trail into approximately Fort Laramie, and then after Fort Laramie, Wyoming, they started north. Surprising to me when we started studying this, we'd always assumed they came a different route over South Pass and to Virginia City from the south, but instead they came on the Bozeman Trail. Unbelievable hardships in the sense that these were wide pieces of machinery, not easily transported. The wagons had to be special built to carry them. They were top heavy. The diary that Cree kept of this journey showed the wagons tipped over many times, and once even tipped over on top of him. So it was difficult from that aspect. When they crossed the Yellowstone by Livingston, for example, they had 7 oxen die in the river, and they had next day to pull all the machinery out. They had to take all of the oxen and hook into one big team and pull those wagons out of the river. So it was a tough journey in that sense.
And so they get to the Gallatin Valley, and then they take established roads over to Virginia, over towards Virginia City. And I wonder if you can talk about that kind of entrance into Virginia City. You know, it was, I believe that most of the wagon trains went up that large hill, and it's not the road that goes in there today. They came in a different route, didn't they?
My understanding, based on the diaries, is that they came through the Gallatin Valley, and they passed Norris Hot Springs, which is marked today, and went over what we call Ennis Hill, and then had to climb up on the ridge above Virginia City Hill. Once up on that ridge, they could have gone across the top of the ridge and then down to the side of the mountain to the head of Spring Gulch, where this Union City is located and where the mill was being built. I do not get the sense that, well, from the diary it says on the very last day, we take the machinery down to the mill and here we cease. That makes me think that they probably did not go down into Virginia City originally and then haul the machinery all the way back up the mountain, back up to where the mill is, the route that we follow today to get to the mill.
Right, because the mill is at Union City, and I wonder if you can just kind of describe its location.
Union City is at the head of Spring Gulch, which is one of the tributaries that come into Alder Creek and Alder Gulch, south of Virginia City, not too far from Mount Baldy, which is the head of that. It's called Union City because everybody there supposedly voted to the person, to the man, for the Union ticket during an election. And it's up the side of the mountain from Summit. Summit was the second largest city in the Gulch, had its own Masonic lodge, had bowling alley, which was owned by Nelson Story, had many, it was a community. Union City was a company town that was up the Gulch, up the head of Spring Gulch, and there were the mill was there, and some huts and pole cabins for the workers, a nice house for the manager. The mill building itself, with the ruins of which still exist today, are on the National Register, and it was quite a bustling little community in 1867, 68 when the mill was in operation.
And so it's at, I think you said it's about 7,000 feet elevation?
It's about 7,000 feet. Union City sits about 7,000 feet elevation.
And so they get the equipment there, they install the equipment, and they proceed to mine.
Well, the mining had been going on, and the equipment was installed. Let me back up. The machinery arrived the first part of October of 1866. We believe that Benjamin Christenot, who did not come back on the wagon train, came back early to supervise the construction of this stone building. So from October through the January, toward the end of January of 67, machinery was being installed in the mill and made operational. And then it was toward the end of January of 1867 when the first ore was crushed. So I imagine there was ore stockpiled or ready to be brought to the mill at that time.
And the mill just sat below this Oro cash load, is that correct?
Right.
Can you start? Yeah.
The Union City, location of the mill at Union City was based upon the fact that one of the rich producers in Alder Gulch was called the Oro Cache, is still called the Oro Cache. And there were various numbers of figures how many dollars of gold were taken out of it. But in fact, right down the hill from the Oro Cache, I don't know, quarter of a mile, half a mile, or two scars in the landscape showing the wagon roads that were used to bring ore from the Oro Cache down to the mill and the mill site. And that was the primary reason for the mill being located at the head of Spring Gulch.
So they commence to crush the ore from the Oro cash load, and they start to extract the gold. And why don't you pick up the story and tell me how it ends? The mill started crushing gold in January of 1867, and from 67 through the end of 1968, from the start of crushing in January of 1867 through the fall of 1867, there were numerous reports of gold being taken to the Nolan and Wherry Bank in Virginia City, showing that there was activity at the mill and that they were crushing gold and they were obtaining gold. But as happens with many of the mines up there, people did not understand the metallurgy of it well enough, and the gold that was readily available to be crushed and to be freed was not in a quantity that sustained the investment that was there. In other words, they couldn't make enough money, and investors soon wanted to have their money. And in order to stay working, the Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company had to issue promissory notes at high rates of interest to various people. And those people were saying, hey, we need to have our bonds or our money returned. So that set off a number of lawsuits. Benjamin Christenot himself, the quote, founder of this, lent money to the Montana Gold and Silver Mining Company, and he also filed suit.
So he was the cause and one of the causes of the demise of the mill. So without making enough money to pay for the expenses and to sustain the notes that they had signed, the whole business crashed and had to be sold at a sheriff's sale. And by 1869, it had all been sold to Creighton and Company in Virginia City, and the machinery was dispersed. We do not know where the Chilean rollers went. We do know the barrel amalgamators that were there did go to Brown's Gulch. We found that in a newspaper, but we really don't know where all the machinery went.
And so basically, it was in operation for all of, what, a year and a half?
Roughly a year and a half. There were sporadic attempts to crush gold. There was even a story where they brought gold from down in the gulch back up the hill to the mill to crush. It was good machinery as far as it goes, but nothing was economically viable, and it soon died.
And so what became of B.F. Christenot?
That's an interesting question. I wrote a paper once on Benjamin Christenot, Where Are You? And the fact is when he finished up with the Gold and Silver Mining Company, he did a little bit in Alder Gulch, but then he disappeared. Later on, we found he had gone to California and taken up a farming homestead down in California, and he died there somewhere around 1908 or 1909 and was buried down there. And he has left some descendants, and we have been in contact with them, and so we're slowly understanding or learning about that part of the family.
And shortly thereafter, did Union City basically become abandoned then?
Yes, I think Union City, once there wasn't any work for the miners, the rude cabins they had just went into the ground, where there are still flat surfaces in places where you can see where they existed. The only thing that remains of this enterprise was these nice, strong, rugged walls of stone that were built for this mill. It was a magnificent building. It is still a magnificent building. And the family has taken it upon themselves to work with the BLM, who owns it, well, we all own it, but the BLM manages it to stabilize and to keep it from further deteriorating. So we've used mortar to cap the stones, and we've built wooden supports for window frames and door frames and such as that to stabilize that building, and we helped get it put on the National Register.
I think we're good.
I have a question.
Yes.
And you can just answer. You can just talk right to Tom here. Do you have a favorite anecdote? Do you have something that's just kind of maybe not necessarily related, but something that you just a story about that you really like to tell?
Contemporary or past?
About the past.
Yeah. In working, in studying and researching and finding out about this this fascinating piece of Alder Gulch history of hard rock mining, we were fortunate to find several sources of information. One of them was a book by A.K. McClure, who came out. He was a newspaper man, and he wrote stories back to papers back east to tell about this. And he describes being in Union City on the 4th of July, 1867. And it's my favorite passage of the book because he describes this day of patriotism dear to us all. And he talks about the numbers of animals and the gophers on the hillside and the flowers and the burro sticking his head in the window of one of the huts, and the people playing quoits and which is a game of darts kind of thing. And then he goes on to describe the people there, and he talks about somebody who had been, I think, in the Russian army, and what comes through to me is the dialects of the language of all of the different people and cultures that ended up working at that mill. And to stand on that ground and to see the mill and hear him talk about the people living there, it just brought home to me some history of how our country came together with so many different nationalities.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. That's a really great story.
Yeah.
It's just the beginnings of the melting pot, and really, all these dialects.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christenot himself was a Swede, or not a Swede, I'm sorry, from Switzerland.
Oh.
He was, the Christenot family is a Switzerland family, but there were various other nationalities that were there.
Right. Yeah, you said there was even, not at Union City, but there were Chinese up there also at one of the camps, weren't there?
Well, there were lots of Chinese in Alder, in Virginia City, and so forth, and not well treated by the Montana Post in terms of terminology. But I believe there were at Beartown, which is one of the small areas on the way up Alder Gulch. There was a community there that Chinese were living in, and I don't know that I've found anything about Chinese in particular at Union City.
Is there something you wish you knew about that place?
Say again, please.
Is there something you wish you knew about that place?
Oh yeah, there's lots of things I wish I knew about it. I certainly would like to have known where all that machinery went and how that progressed. I would. I can't think of anything right offhand that just the general history of it is just there's still lots of unanswered questions and my great-great-grandmother was born in Union City. She was the first child of Charles and Martha. They had just been married in May, and they came in April, in May, and in June, then they were on the wagon train to Montana. So it was both their second marriages. It's not all hardship on wagon trains because for example, my great-grandmother was conceived and bought the Sand Hills in Nebraska based upon her age and date. She was born in Union City. So these people camped their way across the country. And she died in the 1930s, and my grandmother, her first daughter, lived in Virginia City, was born in Virginia City. So my great regret is that I never ever knew of this or talked to my grandmother, and maybe lived at a time where I could have also asked some of these questions of my great-grandmother.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, and then my great-great-grandmother, Martha, died in 1923. So there would have been lots of our family could have talked to her about life at Union City and what went on. But that didn't come down. Our family was not much on recording history.
I think that's true in a lot of families.
Yeah.
And I think there's similar regrets in a lot of families. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We are good.
Okay, good.
That was great, Nick.
Well, thank you.